dirigeants religieux venus des différents pays du monde. Justement, nous allons bien sûr assister à une intervention de sa part de grand imam de l'Azhar.
Queen of Belgium.
La reine de Belge entre dans la salle. Please welcome the President of the Italian Republic and Her Majesty, the Queen of the Belgians.
Signore Presidente della Repubblica Sergio Mattarella,
Mr. President of the Italian Republic, Sergio Mattarella, Your Majesty, Mathilde, Queen of the Belgians, Professor Andrea Riccardi, eminent representatives of great world faiths, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I have the honor of welcoming you to the 39th International Meeting for Peace, opening today with this inaugural assembly in this beautiful music hall at St. Cecilia. We're gathered here from 50 world countries in view of a new step towards the peace for men and women of the great world faith, of culture, of civil society, and of institutions, together with thousands of participants who will be gathered here and online during the 3 days of this meeting. I'm told about 10,000 of them.
una nuova tappa
A new leg in our trip
di un pellegrinaggio
of our uninterrupted pilgrimage, inaugurated on October 27, 1986, by then Pope John Paul II in Assisi, the city of St. Francis, which has continued since from city to city. Thank you to all of you for being here in Rome. After the memorable meeting last year in Paris, whose memory is still alive with us, here we are back in Rome in the year of the Jubilee, to dare peace together, because we would like to bring a solution to wars and conflicts and show everyone that there's always a different path possible than that of the military response, of war, of conflict. And that's the path of dialogue, overcoming misunderstandings, incomprehension, division and hatred. This is the path that we dare tread together for the past 40 years. These are going to be 2.5 days of dialogue that will continue every day in all of the forums. We will continue by giving a voice to the millions of victims of the many conflicts and wars. We shall pray for the gift of peace on Tuesday afternoon. Each one of us in his or her religious faith, and in particular with Pope Leo XIV. At the inauguration of this meeting, I have the honor of handing the floor to the Mayor of Rome, Mr. Roberto Gualtieri.
Roma è in questi giorni.
In these days, the city of Rome is the city of peace.
Grazie.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for your presence and for your greetings. Mr. President of the Republic, Your Majesty, Your Eminencies, Your Excellencies, civil and religious authorities, distinguished guests, dear friends of the community of Sant'Egidio, it is a great honor for me to bring you greetings from Rome to this prestigious meeting dedicated to peace on the 60th anniversary of the Declaration Nostra Aetate, born of the Second Vatican Council. Peace is Rome's highest calling, and it is essential that in such hard times as ours, our city, which is the center of the Catholic Church, and where a variety of cultures and faiths coexist peacefully, that our city continues to raise its voice in favor of friendship, understanding, and solidarity among peoples. We will never resign ourselves to the idea that war can become a means of settling international disputes. We will not yield to the spirit of power that seeks to erase the law, or rather, to make itself into the law. We will not resign ourselves to hatred, to fundamentalism that denies the dignity of others, to the end that justifies any means in view of asserting itself. Some might say that the efforts of those who fight for peace clash with the harsh reality of conflict. We do not intend to flee from reality, far from that. We are aware of the complexity and effort involved in any construction process, but we are here to say that if we look at the world honestly, there's nothing more realistic than the commitment to peace. That is the only way to ensure a future of security and dignity for all. True, wars and resurgence in imperialist logics are dramatically weakening international law and multilateralism, which is its necessary context. But those images of devastation and death coming from so many places and even from very close to us are proof that we cannot abandon that hope for peace and those paths to peace that have nourished our recent history. Dialogue between religions can become a lever for building peace where opposition and hatred are rooted today. Peace is a daily commitment, but it's also a force of history which passes through the responsibility of institutions, communities, and citizens. This initiative, promoted by the community of Sant'Egidio and brings together religious leaders, people of culture, politicians, and political representatives, is a living, concrete, and tangible testimony to the possibility, indeed, to the reality or realism of peace, dialogue, and cooperation. The city of Rome wants to be the capital of peace and brotherhood among peoples, and it stands on your side. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now to introduce these days, we'll listen to Professor Andrea Riccardi, the tireless promoter of the spirit of Assisi, a man of dialogue and of peace. Thank you for taking the floor before this assembly and for inviting us to their peace. Mr. President of the Republic, Your Majesty, Your Holiness, Your Beatitudes, distinguished representatives of the churches and world faith, dear Mayor, dearest friends, we're living and experiencing troubled times, caught between grave concerns and hopes for the resolution of one of the most dramatic conflicts of our time. It would be an immense sign in an age which is characterized by the use of force that has rehabilitated war as the primary means of pursuing one's interests and designs. Some lights of hope have indeed been lit, but these are lights at the end of a tunnel. Mine is not pessimism. It is not pessimistic to note how much space war occupies on the horizon. We are in that age of force which has humiliated the institutions created to achieve peace. On the 24th of October, the United Nations organization celebrated its 80th anniversary. Its charter begins as follows: "We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save future generations from the scourge of war." These words flowed from peoples who have experienced war and its pain and felt it to be a scourge. For the Romans, the scourge was a terrible instrument of torture. The age of force is revolutionizing in a negative way languages and relations between peoples, undermining the culture of dialogue and diplomacy too. It has trampled international law, which is now treated as bureaucratic legalism when it is in fact the fruit of civilization. It has poured into people's souls a charge of aggression whose effects are yet to be understood fully. It has denied in practice that peoples have a common destiny, and it has done so with an ideology built upon the recovery of buried myths, of nationalism, of old and new fears. The age of force is strongly linked to the rise of global techno-capitalism. With lucidity and courage, the President of the Italian Republic, Mr. Mattarella, whom I greet and thank for being here with us, the Italian President, as I said, stated, "We do not want to surrender to the prospect of a society dominated by oligarchs, or rather by the privileged based on wealth, unscrupulousness, and indifference towards others, which is emerging by removing the values of equality, solidarity, and freedom." Close quotes. But if we look back, we'll wonder how ever we slipped into the age of force, into a society dominated by the few. The courageous non-violent push that brought down regimes that stole freedom and tore down the wall in 1989 has triggered what we call globalization, a world connected like never before. But what has been achieved is indeed only a half globalization, only involving capital, technology, and the market. half a globalization. Frankly, with prophetic frankness, Pope Francis said, and I quote, "The opportunities offered by the end of the Cold War were never fully seized due to a lack of vision of the future and a shared awareness of our common destiny. Instead, we gave in to the pursuit of particular interests without taking responsibility for the universal common good. Thus, the deceptive specter of war has reared its head once again," said the Pope, and he concluded, "Every war leaves the world worse than it found it. War is a failure of politics and of humanity, a shameful surrender, a defeat in the face of the forces of evil." End quote. That was Pope Francis. This striking definition of war remains as the legacy of a great pope. The unified world has not done away with war. An Italian scholar, Professor Schiavone, speaks of, and I quote, "a world unified only in the great techno-capitalist centers of command, the mega-private supranational corporations, and for the rest is abandoned to complete enemy, anarchy, and total fragmentation, without any kind of governance that could hinder the power of the few. There are no alternatives in sight. Globalization has abandoned much of humanistic thought. We see this in the current lack of teachers in old Europe. It has abandoned the globalization of the spirit, the encounter between and among religions, which is a source of humanism and humanization, which places women and men at the center. Because at the heart of every religious faith is the value of the human person, not only in the Mishnah, but also in the Holy Quran. We find the belief that whoever saves a man saves the whole world. And this age of force is not anti-religious, as previous warlike seasons were, but it has learned to use religions to consecrate conflicts and interests. New religions of prosperity are growing to bless the race for self-affirmation. Success and money are at the heart. And unfortunately, the world of religious faith is affected by the process of fragmentation, with a reduction of ecumenism and of dialogue. There are no easy alternatives in sight, and this causes feelings of powerlessness that generate indifference, the alienation of the timid, the focus upon oneself. People, that is, no longer believe that there is much history to be written, but only a present to live in. Yet, religions come from afar and have a long history. They have cultivated faith in God and values such as peace and respect for humanity, and that through terrible times. And ours is definitely not the most terrible, even if we do not know what tomorrow will bring. No, religions come from a distance that is beyond the distant. They do not give up accompanying humanity towards the future. A great wit, as Abraham Herschel wrote, and I quote, "A single bridge has been thrown across the abyss of despair, and that is prayer. Prayer is the cry of anguish that becomes a perception of God's mercy." End quotes. Religions have fought each other. They have sometimes succumbed to violence, sheltered behind walls. They have despised each other. Of course, there have been notable exceptions, but sister religions make peoples more like brothers. From the 20th century, we have inherited something we are convinced of, something important. Religious conflicts, contempt between and among religions are now only the preserve of extremists whose hatred for human life highlights how theirs is not the God of the great religious traditions, but an idol that justifies power through terror. In the 20th century, walls between religions have cracked and collapsed sometimes. And this is no small thing. The humanist interest in them has been rekindled. In recent years, dialogue has highlighted convergences without, however, hiding the substantial differences between and among them. Yet, one way or the other, religions teach that evil cannot win, and the most hideous face of evil is war. War disfigures man. War is the mother of all poverty. On the 28th of October 1965, as Mayor Gualtieri recalled, 60 years ago, the Second Vatican Council issued a declaration, Nostra Aetate, that dealt with religions. Nostra Aetate begins with a remark, and I quote, In our time, the human race is becoming more closely united, and the interdependence of peoples is increasing. End quote. There is a perception of an imminent, incipient globalization affecting religions. What could be done? And the reply was, in Nostra Aetate, and I quote, we cannot invoke God as the father of all men if you refuse to behave as brothers towards some of the men who are created in the image and likeness of God. End quote. This is what Nostra Aetate had to say, and in 1986, Assisi vividly and creatively represented these words of the Second Vatican Council. Nostra Aetate repudiates hatred between and amongst religions. It hates every manifestation of anti-Semitism. And that was the beginning of a season of dialogue, encounter, and brotherhood, which was not easy at all, after centuries of estrangement. The root of dialogue, says Nostra Aetate, is the following, and I quote, the various people constitute one community, they have one origin, and I end quote. Religions, in their irreducible differences, are aware of this, and dialogue, little by little, reveals that all peoples are one community. Dialogue is the meeting ground of religious faiths, but it's also inherent, intrinsic to religions, as Pope Paul VI stated, and I quote, religion is by its nature a relationship between God and man. Prayer expresses this relationship in dialogue, end quote. The timid dialogue of the early years burst forth in the great meeting convened by John Paul II almost 40 years ago, on the 27th of October 1986 in Assisi. in whose spirit and in whose footsteps the community of Sant'Egidio travels, taking up the Pope's conclusive words, and I quote, "Peace is a construction site open to everyone, not only to specialists, to scholars and strategists. Peace is indeed a universal responsibility." End quote. Yes, for the spirit of Assisi still blows. It is still blowing despite the winds of war. And religions have a power of dialogue, a force of dialogue, unarmed but convincing, to be brought into play to achieve a much-needed transition, a transition which is necessary today from the age of force to the age of dialogue and negotiation, from the age of force to the age of dialogue and negotiation. Of course, dialogue is not yet peace. It is the recognition that the other must be part of my future. Dialogue means never without the other. Dialogue detoxifies a world, writes a great war correspondent, Hedge, a world addicted to the powerful drug of war. The drug clouds the mind and makes us forget how necessary peace is. War is the extremism of polarization, a reality that tears society and even democracy apart. From the age of force and war to the age of dialogue and negotiation, we must make our weight felt in this transition. Let us then direct our prayers towards this intention. We must bring about an eruption of ordinary women and men into history through the practice of dialogue with fraternal thoughts, with visions of peace. In a fragmented society, as many are today, where the ego dominates, the whimsical dimension of ego dominates, where communication is reduced to little more than social media, where people shout and polarize, dialogue must return to the center stage in society and in relations between peoples. I remember that Francis, when he came to visit us at the community many years back, exclaimed, "The world is choking without dialogue." The cage we are in is pessimism. Pessimism makes us give up and pushes us to think that the world is lost to its demons, or perhaps that those demons are not all that ugly after all. To think that there is no grand design, so better save yourself. A great teacher, Paul Ricard, said, and I quote, "However radical evil may be, it is not as deep as goodness." And religions, in the plural, have a meaning, which is to release the goodness within human beings and seek it out where it is hiding. End quote. This is daring to make peace, releasing the goodness within, which is the desire for peace and for living together. This is our strength, which takes us from the age of war to the age of dialogue. Making peace is not the magic of a single day or by a single man, but when dialogue begins, we can already taste peace, because dialogue means discovering the other as oneself. A great German novelist who fought in the First World War, Erich Maria Remarque, gave voice to the combatants of all world wars in his book, All Quiet on the Western Front, a book that was even burned by the Nazis as they viewed it as dangerous. In that text, a 19-year-old soldier who discovers the humanity of the enemy says, and I quote, "Comrade, I didn't want to kill you. Why didn't they ever tell us that you are poor dogs like us, that your mothers are in anguish for you as ours are for us, and that we have the same terror, the same death, and the same suffering? Forgive me."
Ladies and gentlemen, that was live from Rome, as the Grand Imam of Azhar is in Rome in order to attend the meeting, the international meeting for prayer and dialogue for peace in the Vatican.
رسالة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ليست دينا منفصلا مستقلا عن رسالة إخوانه عيسى وموسى وإبراهيم ونوح عليهم السلام. كل ما يقال عن الإسلام في شأن السلام يقال مثله تماما عن المسيحية وعن اليهودية أيضا.
نصلي بقلب واحد إلى الله قائلين: يا ملك السلام أعطنا سلامك.
فاعجب لدين يدفع أبناءه ليقاتلوا من أجل تأمين أهل الأديان الأخرى وتأمين أماكن عبادتهم.
أناشد الضمير العالمي بالتوقف عن دعم واستخدام الجماعات المتشددة لأهداف سياسية.
وإذا قيل لا تحاكم الأديان بجرائم بعض المؤمنين بها، فلماذا لا يقال ذلك على الإسلام؟
لن نواجه آلات الموت إلا بنشر السلام في ربوع المسكونة كلها، لأن الكتاب المقدس يطالبنا بذلك قائلا: اتبعوا السلام مع الجميع.
لنعلن للناس جميعا أن الأديان بريئة من تهمة الإرهاب.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is live from Rome, as the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar attends the international dialogue and prayer for peace in the Vatican.
Reagan and Gorbachev, which led to increasing international interdependence that seemed to have ushered us into an age of peace. Today we are confronted with a very different scenario in Europe as well. The theme of strength, power, once again is considered as a yardstick through which international relations are measured. With the European Union, we have established a condition that has been achieved so far, amongst its members, whereby weapons would be silenced forever. And this because of the democratic will expressed by its free peoples, not because of an imperialistic imposition or an imposition from a dictator who were the protagonist of inhuman experiments in the past century. Condition and values that have been so relevant, and they have influenced other parts of the world, triggering a situation that would lead to the globalization of rights, gradually bridging the gap between the peoples in the global north and the global south. This was not for sure a time that was devoid of tension and a high price that was paid very harshly by civilian populations, as it was the case in our neighboring Balkans. But through the United Nations and its organizations, the tools were provided for a persevering pursuit of a path of peace as an antidote against the temptation to use force and prevarication. Increasingly important protagonists over time were public opinion and people's movements for peace, communities, just like the community of Sant'Egidio, that developed pathways always towards peace. A very valuable commitment, which in the current geopolitical scenario, more than ever seems to be indispensable. The spirit of Assisi which once again we celebrate in these gatherings, reminds us all that peace is not an achievement that is acquired once and for all without dedicating endless efforts to it. Peace must be pursued, cherished, and we must be daring in pursuing peace, to refer to the evocative title that was chosen for this gathering. As Pope Leo XIV has rightly said, we have to disarm our souls and words in order to pursue peace. And I would like to refer back to his plea that he expressed when he visited the Quirinal Palace a few days ago, so that we all continue to work to reestablish peace in every part of the world, so that evermore we will cherish and promote principles of justice, equity, cooperation amongst peoples that are necessarily at the foundation of peace. Hearing these words and looking at the instability, the tensions, the conflicts, violence, even verbal violence that characterizes our current age, then we witness the spreading of attitudes that, if they applied to the coexistence in our national societies, they would be considered as thugs, people believing and acting in this way. And behaviors that are considered to be severely censurable in normal human relations, and we cannot really understand how such behaviors in international relations are considered instead as political facts. Anything that would be unacceptable in our normal relations in our societies. And the word dialogue, instead of being considered to be synonymous with fortitude, now it's considered as synonymous with weakness. Fait accomplis and actions of strength tend to acquire the form of definitive situations, whereas they're only the premise for the explosion of future clashes. And this is our duty. It is our duty to counter them. With cynicism and senselessness, the toll in human lives of war oftentimes is perceived by the belligerents as an inferior price to be paid compared to peace. Let us ask ourselves, which prompts people to use humongous resources to be burnt on the altar of war instead of building peace? We need radical change in the mindset and also in the conduct that we choose. For sure, for peace, we need great courage and a lot of work. But peace is life, it is development, it is good for us. Wars, as we were reminded by Professor Riccardi, evoking Fratelli Tutti, wars leave our world worse off than it was in the beginning. And Pius the 12th, 1939, warned us that nothing is lost with peace. Everything can be lost with war. In the Near and Middle East, in Ukraine, in Sudan, and in so many other parts of the world. What will it take in order to restore relations between people? And I share the words of the Chief Rabbi Goldblit. It is necessary to change and look for peace together. Today, the courage of daring peace acquires an even greater value. The news that we heard in the last few days from Gaza after the Sharm el-Sheikh agreements, with the first steps towards an agreement amongst the warring parties in the Middle East and the release of the hostages, remind us that peace processes need perseverance, patience, a work of mediation, and also taking on responsibilities. Institutions, diplomacies, and many other peacemakers, including religious communities, they fulfill this role day in and day out, quite often far away from the limelight and without having the ambition to be recognized in any way. But here also, I would like to mention Al-Tayyib, the great Imam of Al-Azhar, to propitiate peace. When he spoke about interfaith peace and dialogue, he reiterated the need for everyone to raise the banner of peace instead of that of victory, and to sit at the table of dialogue.
Alla forza della prepotenza.
Confronted with the strength of arrogance, instead we have to oppose this with the calm strength of institutional peace. The hope is that this spark of hope, as Pope Leo XIV defined it, that was ignited in the Middle East, will extend to Ukraine, where negotiations are having a hard time being brought to fruition, whereas the suffering of children, women, men, caused by the ruthlessness of Russian aggression show no signs of decreasing. What is happening right now imposes upon us to persevere in a common and balanced answer, inspired by a sense of justice and respect for international law, from the universal expression of human rights. These are the principles that the Italian Republic identifies with. The contribution of peacemakers who build bridges and weave relations between communities in conflict, peacekeepers who watch over the maintenance of peace and the protection of the most vulnerable, is absolutely precious, making sure that peace can rise even in the more hostile context. The message is clear: to the violence of arms. Well, there's always an alternative road to the violence of arms, in a different way that is more beneficial to all, to settle disputes, escaping fatal risk of uncontrolled escalation, whose effects jeopardize the survival of humankind. In the memory of humankind, the memories of the tragedies that characterized the last World War risk becoming weaker. Here we have Kondo Koko, Unibakusha.
Una sopravvissuta
Survivor
che devastò Hiroshima.
From the nuclear bomb that devastated Hiroshima. Even what was a watershed in history today seems to be questioned. And we cannot but remember that making peace must include other aspects. If we look at the vast pockets of poverty in the world, the suffering of migrants, the growing concentration of wealth in just a few individuals, and also in specific, instead of being shared with everyone. When confronted with war and in favor of peace, religions speak with the strength of their authoritativeness, with the definition of peace as holy, the untiring pursuit of what unites human beings, the promotion of global solidarity. All of us, we are all called to renew our trust in the cause of peace. Let us make the plea of this gathering common and shared. Let us continue to dare to pursue peace. Let us continue to invest in pathways of dialogue and mediation, to support those who suffer, to build bridges between peoples, to contribute to a world where peace is not just a utopia, a dream for fools, but a shared reality, a reality where, as Pope Francis reminded us of, we recognize the dignity of every human being, when fraternity becomes the inspiring principle of an international order that is more just and sustainable.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Grazie per le sue parole, signore.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your kind words. And now I have the distinct honor to hand the floor to Her Majesty Queen Mathilde of the Belgians, who has inaugurated the ceremony on the Grand Place in September 1986. It is a great honor to have you amongst us tonight.
Monsieur le Président, Excellences,
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we're gathered here not to be just spectators of life, but to be wardens of history. We are connected by a holy duty to preserve the thin, fragile thread of peace at a time today when discord threatens us and fuels so many troublesome situations. The voice of the community of Sant'Egidio rises as a sign of hope and justice. Peace is such a noble ideal. It is not passive, it's a covenant among people and among generations. It is the art of reconciling differences, the art of turning the adversary into a brother in order to build sounder, much sounder links than the forces that try to divide us. The community of Sant'Egidio, by its resolute commitment embraces this goal, and this shows that even in the darkest times, human spirit may indeed illuminate the path to follow. And this is more than ever necessary because the construction of the world of order, the building of the world order created in the past decades is now being shaken by the contempt, by the shadow of war, and those alliances that used to be so sound are now teetering. Conflicts are increasingly threatening the equilibria that guaranteed our shared prosperity for such a long time. Amidst these uncertainties, we're called to make a choice. Should we take shelter and refuge in selfishness, or should we all rise together and defend the principles which unite us? Today, resources are increasingly exploited in order to dominate other countries, and the most vulnerable are marginalized vis-à-vis progress. The despair, the poverty of the people compelled to leave their lands, the destruction of our planet are not mere tragedies, they are actually the tangible expression of our collective failure. We have been unable to prioritize the common good. We should never forget that peace is not only the absence of war. Peace is the presence of justice. It is the guarantee of freedom. It is the promise for a future where everyone can prosper and thrive. In order to achieve these goals, we should always remind ourselves of a number of dimensions. One, human dignity should be the first value to respect. For peace is not an option, it is a moral commitment, it's an obligation. Peace compels us to place the needs of the most vulnerable right at the center of our exchanges. It compels us to invest into quality education, to protect health, the physical and mental well-being of human persons. It compels us to achieve the UN's Millennium Goals so that states may be helped to establish or preserve peace, to eradicate poverty and hunger, to reduce inequalities, to achieve sustainable and shared growth. All of these are factors of peace. Development and peace indeed go hand in hand. I should like to quote His Holiness Pope Leo XIV in this respect, when he tells us that peace is always, that war is always a failure. Let us now look beyond the horizon of the present time. We're constantly tackling new challenges such as environmental change, demographic changes, technology's increasing presence in our daily lives. These are all dimensions of our day and age. So we need a new vision and much courage. We should build a humanity not made out of arrogance and force, but innovation, progress, respecting our humanity. We should rekindle the flame of public debate at a time when truth is often hidden or concealed by disinformation. We should instead reaffirm the value of debate, of dialogue, of a critical spirit and the exchange of opinions and views, because it is only thanks to dialogue that societies may grow in mutual respect. It is thanks to dialogue that conflicts may decrease and that the seeds of peace may be sown. Above all, we should never forget young people. Youngsters are tomorrow's architects. They are the players, the actors of the future, and they hold so much potential. So therefore, let us give them the tools to build a world of greater equality and greater compassion.
De même, écoutons la sagesse des femmes, dont les voix...
Also, let us listen to the wisdom of women, because women have always been the quiet force behind every great struggle for justice. Women's inclusion is not a concession. It is a crucial condition for the future of our societies.
Mesdames et messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen,
n'est pas un slogan.
to dare peace is not a slogan, it is an appeal launched by those who believe that it is indeed possible to have a better world, those who understand that the cost of inaction is far heavier than the cost of action, which of course requires boldness and determination. But history will judge us based upon the heritage of peace that we will leave to our children and grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Merci. Merci, Majesté.
Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you for your words.
Ora ho il piacere di dare
And now I have the great pleasure to give the floor to Professor Manuel Castells. He's a sociologist. He teaches at the University of California, Berkeley, and he is a keen observer of the social transformations that are characterizing our time and age. Thank you. I would like to give you the floor.
Buonasera,
Good evening,
Presidente della Repubblica,
Mr. President of the Italian Republic, Your Majesty, Mayor of Rome,
present here. War as the ultimate expression of violence is a permanent feature of human history. War is always destructive. That's why peace is our supreme good. In the 21st century, war continues and people continue to be killed by wars. Directly and indirectly, in this century, about 10 million people have been killed, including over 1 million civilians. And we witness every day major wars that are in process. In Ukraine, the endless, senseless war prompted by the Russian invasion has already killed or injured seriously over 1 million people, counting both sides, and including thousands of civilians, particularly Ukrainian civilians. We all have in mind the atrocious massacre and kidnapping perpetrated by Hamas against almost 2,000 Israeli citizens, which prompted and also atrocious massacre perpetrated by Israeli army in Gaza, killing tens of thousands of Palestinians, the majority of them being women and children. Largely unreported and underestimated conflicts in the last years such as Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Darfur, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a long geography of horror have taken over 5 million lives since 1998. Moreover, humans, as we always did, are using the terrifying destructive power resulting for the new technologies produced by our ingenuity, such as drones, hypersonic missiles, satellite surveillance and guidance, artificial intelligence particularly. As we speak, new war threats seem to be unfolding in Venezuela, and dark clouds over Colombia. Which are the main reasons that we know as social scientists for war making then and now? For people at large, fear of the other. That's a fundamental point, fearing the other. Neuroscience tells us that fear is the most potent human emotion, often induced and manipulated by interested warmongers, from political demagogues to the military-industrial complex. For institutions, including governments and political actors, is the drive to expand and deepen their power, be it in territorial terms or in the imposition of their will on other countries to appropriate their wealth, to influence their decisions, and to impose their values. Neuroscience also knows that the emotional antidote against fear is hope. Hope. Yet, hope in institutions of all kinds in our world, from politics to mainstream media, corporations, and even science, this hope is fading away, as in most of the world, in a trend that is amplified by the predominance of the post-trust culture nurtured in the digital social communication networks, where opinions and beliefs are constructed in our time. As a consequence of these developments, political actors animated by hatred, are coming to the forefront of the public life, undermining democracy and steering confrontation around our interdependent world, perhaps threatening maybe a global conflict in the years to come. What could be done to counter these destructive trends that threaten to doom our species and our planet? Here is where the role of faith, religious values, and religious institutions becomes more important than ever. Not that they escape to the crisis of trust, sometimes due to mistakes and sins of religious institutions themselves. However, 90% of people in the planet have religious beliefs, 90%, and 80% believe in one unique God. In a period of despair and hopelessness, the refuge in God is a potent source of generating hope. Yet, to mobilize this potential, our religious leaders, such as those present here in this interfaith meeting, should use all their influence in bringing political actors to peace. We need a courageous religious leadership to influence society at large and political and social actors to give priority to achieving world peace before it is too late. The community of San Egidio has shown in a number of countries that it is possible to reach consensus and to end wars. As for us, common people, we cannot rely on God's help if we do not act ourselves. This is the meaning of the freedom that God gave us. We must engage in an open public debate, including the debate on social media. We must pressure our governments and our institutions in every way we can. And we must create a global, local peace movement beyond our ideologies and political preferences. And calling particularly on young people present here and around the world, who have the energy, the hope, and the freedom of a spirit to fight for their future. If we help ourselves, God will help us. If all of us hope and fight, with God's help, a peaceful world is still possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Castells, for your words. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now welcome one of the great voices of Islam, with whom we have been walking together, the great Imam Ahmed Al-Tayyib, the rector of Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt. Dear great Imam Al-Tayyib, on the 4th of February 2019, you and Pope Francis signed the document on human brotherhood for peace and world coexistence, also known as the Declaration of Abu Dhabi. It is indeed with joy that we are listening, we're preparing to listen to you, great Imam Al-Tayyib.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalam.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate.
فخامة سيد الرئيس سيرجيو ماتريو رئيس الجمهورية الإيطالية، جلالة الملكة ملكة بلجيكا، الحفل الكريم.
Mr. President, Queen Mathilde.
ففي بداية كلمتي.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, may the peace, mercy and blessings of God be upon you.
والقائمين عليها.
At the outset of my remarks, I would like to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to the community of St. Egidio and its leaders for their constant dedication to dialogue between and amongst followers of different faiths and cultures, and for their defense of eternal human values inspired by the revelation of the heavenly religions and their sacred texts. I am sure you will agree with me that the notion of absolute justice is the golden rule upon which the heavens and the earth are grounded. God has made it the guarantor of human rights in matters of equality, freedom, dignity, security, peace, and brotherhood among human beings, regardless of differences of race, gender, color, religion, of language. And you will agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, that contemporary civilization's deliberate neglect of these values has yielded bitter fruits. Senseless wars foisted upon poor and desperate peoples lacking the means to defend themselves against aggressors. Human beings with hard hearts and petrified consciences who mock human dignity and violate what God has forbidden to profanate in the heavenly texts and in His sacred revelation. Not to mention the economic crisis born of the absence of these values, and I mean poverty, unemployment, hunger, the division of the world between a rich and opulent north and a poor south, crushed by wars, famines, debt, disease and pestilence, and again environmental crisis due to the reckless exploitation of natural resources, and political crisis accompanied by tension, conflict, fear, intimidation, and vain expectations, all of them unbearable living conditions, and even by social crises that threaten the religious and moral beliefs and values of peoples, targeting the family as an institution, children, exporting alternatives and deviations that religions and morals reject, and that healthy human nature has never accepted from the time of Adam, peace be upon him, to the present day. Distinguished guests, what modern man lacks are the values of justice, the absence of which has caused profound confusion in notions and parameters that help us distinguish between good and evil, beauty and ugliness, right and wrong, to such an extent that it's now commonplace to see injustice masquerading as law, tyranny, and the arrogance of power imposing themselves upon the weak in the name of the so-called world order, while atrocities and violations are justified in the name of quote-unquote interests and goals. The wars that have ravaged our peaceful East are a clear example of this. As soon as the first spark is lit, tragedies and horrors follow. Homes are destroyed. Families uprooted, children starved to death, and human dignity trampled upon before the eyes of the so-called civilized world of the 21st century. What a shame is freedom that denies the weak the sacred right to life and land. What a shame is a justice that allows and justifies such atrocities. And since nothing prevails over the law, the consciences of free individuals have risen up in the East and in the West, women, men, children, and the elderly. In various parts of the world, have condemned the massacres in Gaza, Palestine, mass killings that have pierced the heart of man, wounded his conscience, and written black pages in modern history. This situation has been weighing heavily on our hearts for more than 2 years. And it unveils a serious imbalance in the structure of international order and the deep-set disorder in its policies. By now, world peace is hostage to power relationships, to profits from the arms trade and the war economy. All of this completely ignoring the criteria of law and equity, neglecting the voice of conscience and the natural instinct which God has placed in human beings and the logic of reason that God has given to all human beings. These multiple crises point to a deep-set loss of direction in the world order, which has lost its way and by now is applying double standards, indeed 100 standards if necessary. This moral disease that has infected international justice can only be explained by hideous racism, which is in total contradiction of the laws of absolute justice enshrined in Islam, my faith, and in all divine revelations that preceded it, and in which philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle, Al-Farabi, Averroes have believed, and many contemporary Europeans intellectuals who believes in the ethics of duty and in the eternal human conscience have believed. At this point, I cannot fail to express my sincere appreciation for those countries which have taken the initiative to recognize the state of Palestine. I want to congratulate them over their boldness.
وأحييها على هذه الشجاعة التي تجسد صحوة
These bold stances embody the victory of human conscience in favor of the usurped Palestinian right, and we will hope that this recognition represents a concrete, a serious step on the path that will allow the Palestinian people to obtain their legitimate rights, first and foremost, the creation of their independent state with Jerusalem as its capital. I also believe that the international community today agrees that the two-state solution is the only way to achieve peace in the region and in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we should know that when justice is lacking, it is replaced by injustice. With injustice, values disappear, and man loses his humanity, which is trampled upon by material interests and ambitions, as well as by arrogance.
وكذلك الاستقواء والاستئساد الكاذب
when the weak are deprived of their rights and the oppressors are honored for having taken them away, when human beings become insignificant numbers in political calculation or cheap commodities in the market economy, then we realize that justice has faded and declined almost totally, and that the world is plunging into an ethical void that heralds the collapse of systems even before the collapse of their ethical values. For all these reasons, Al-Azhar al-Sharif, together with the Council of Muslim Scholars and with the Holy See, have promoted the historic document of human brotherhood that I signed with my dear brother, the late Pope Francis, in Abu Dhabi in 2019. In that document, we reiterated that peace cannot be a passive situation represented merely by the absence of weapons or disarmament, which is impossible. Peace, in fact, is an active, an existential presence, namely the presence
Gentlemen, we are listening to the Grand